I'm going to start off with the Dead Sea Scrolls today. It's a collection of writings that represent the library of a religious group that was active in what the Romans called Judea. We would now call it Israel, or the occupied West Bank, in the 1st century AD. The Dead Sea Scrolls is a really remarkable find. But it's a remarkable find that carries with it a warning to a certain extent. Because the Dead Sea Scrolls include a lot of material that seems to represent the Jewish religion as many people believed it at that time, and it's quite different from what modern Jews believe today. So the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls raises the question of what is the correct form of Judaism? And I'm going to take this class a little bit further by looking at two other discoveries, similar discoveries, that raise the question of what is the correct form of Christianity and what is the correct form of Islam. Sometimes I get things thrown at me when I get to the last section, but please be patient and just listen to what I have to say. Well, the Dead Sea Scrolls, the story really starts probably in February 1947, when this man here, when he was much younger, this photograph was taken in the 1960s, Muhammad Ahmed al-Hamid, known as Adib, the wolf, a shepherd, walking around the mountain to the northwest of the Dead Sea, lost a goat. He thought it was in one of the caves, so he started throwing stones in the caves to try and get the goat out. And to his surprise, he heard a pottery jar breaking in one of them. So the wolf, Adib, went into the cave, the wolf in the cave, to find out what was there. He found a collection of pottery jars, and in some of them he saw some rolled up pieces of what he recognized were leather. So he started looking at these, and some actually had writing on them. He realizes that, well, this must be old, it's very valuable. He's not quite certain what to do, so he talks to his cousin, Muhammad al-Jumar, who lives in Bethlehem. And al-Jumar says, well, I think we can sell these and make some money out of them. So they took 7, or al-Jumar took 7 of these pieces of leather to Bethlehem and then Jerusalem and sold them to an antiquities dealer. He realized that what they were the remains of ancient writing scrolls. Now, before the invention of the book, all writing was done on papyrus or sometimes on leather in this particular way, as a scroll. You would wind this up, unwind it as you read it. It's not a book, it's not a bound book, it's a series of separate pages all fastened together. These can be quite long, 8 meters, 9 meters. If you want to read Homer's Iliad on a scroll, Homer's Iliad has got 15,934 lines in Greek. You didn't know that, did you? Well, it does, in 10 books. That's a scroll which is about 25 meters long. You don't take that to bed to read it, do you? No, definitely not. So anyway, the dealer realizes that these ancient writing scrolls, and he looks at the writing, he sees that some are in Hebrew, but some of them are written in Aramaic. Now, Aramaic, Semitic language, Semitic script, basically gives birth to the Arab script. Aramaic was the common language amongst the ordinary people in the Middle East, what is now Israel, Lebanon, Syria, right into the Roman period. It starts to disappear about the 2nd century after Christ. So the antiquities dealer could see that these scrolls had to be something like 2,000 years old. He made certain they hadn't been stolen from a synagogue or a museum and started selling them. 3 of them are bought by the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, and 4 of them are bought it's quickly recognized that these are in Aramaic, and one is a rule book, the rule book of the community. It's a series of writings about how a group of people living together should live. How many times you eat, what you do in the afternoon, and so forth. So this is clearly a writing, a scroll that's connected with a community that's living outside a city, a religious community, a sect, a group of people following a particular type of religion. The other four scrolls were brought by this man, Athanasius Yeshua Samuel. He's the Syriac Archbishop of Jerusalem. He was born at Nisibis, Syriac Christian area, left Turkey in 1917, and then brought up, obviously, as a Syrian Christian, eventually becomes the Archbishop of Jerusalem. He looks at the four Hebrides, and he realizes that one of them is the book of Isaiah, part of the Jewish Bible. And it's written in Hebrew. Well, the thing is that at this time, the oldest example of Hebrew writing that anybody knew about dated to the 12th century after Christ. He can see that this is a writing scroll. He knows it's been found with Aramaic ones, so therefore this has to be about 2,000 years old. It's the oldest piece of Hebrew writing that has survived to this day. Well, word starts to spread out and other bits and pieces start to appear on the Jerusalem Antiquities Market. And it's soon seen that all these bits of scroll are essentially written in the same style in Hebrew, Aramaic. One is actually in Greek, or a few are in Greek, but mainly Aramaic and Hebrew, that they almost certainly represent a single find, which would be a library of the sect, this unknown community living somewhere in that region at the time. Well, then a slight problem happened. The British are very good at leaving problems everywhere. We left a big problem in India in 1948, so you get India and Pakistan separating in a big war. We left a big problem in Cyprus in 1960, so you get the division of Cyprus. We did the same thing in the Middle East. We left Palestine and we left Jews fighting Arabs. The Israeli-Arab War of 1947 to 1949. This prevented any further investigation into where these had come from. But eventually, with the separation, the creation of the State of Israel, people start to get in touch with the wolf, El-Dib, and they find out that all these bits of scroll had come from the area of Qumran. So starting in 1949, archaeologists and antiquities hunters started searching this whole area, and by 1955 a total of 11 caves had been found containing other examples of scrolls. This is the original cave, Qumran Cave 1. That's where the original scrolls came from. Many of the other caves much harder to get to. This is Qumran Cave 4, very difficult to actually get to. I'll let you into a secret about Qumran Cave 4. Qumran Cave 4 was used by the local Bedouin to store their rifles during the Arab-Israeli War of 1947-49. That's how the scrolls in that particular one were found. By 1955, 11 caves had been discovered with pieces of scroll in them. A total of 972. Now, if you read the textbook, you will say, oh, wait a minute, it says about 700. No, 972. Because what the author of the textbook didn't realise is that the antiquities hunters had taken several of the scrolls away. There are many more bits of scroll in other parts. Well, some of these scrolls were found inside complete jars like this, standing just over 1 metre high, and those scrolls tended to be in incredibly good condition. All of them were of leather. All of them, or most of them, found in jars. One scroll made of copper, which was found lying on the floor of a cave. The complete scrolls are really absolutely fascinating. For example, the Book of Isaiah scroll, 7.2 meters long, very well preserved. This is the Temple scroll, which is 8.75 meters long, and a very fascinating and disturbing piece of information it contains as well. It basically says that the Jewish temple in Jerusalem wasn't built according to the way God said it should have been built. Ooh, see all these little bits and pieces of information that come out from there. Unfortunately, a large number of scrolls had been eaten by rodents, mice, rats, or insects. So you end up with some bits of scroll like this, and when you're really unlucky, you get bits like this that don't even have a complete word on them. Well, as the scrolls began to be unrolled, they started to be studied in great detail. It began to be seen that the writing was pretty similar between most of them, that they contained a series of different types of religious works, secular works as well, for example, a calendar for calculating the sunrise and the evening times. Some of the scrolls, like the rule book of the community, clearly related to a sect that lived by itself, a Jewish sect that lived by itself somewhere in the Qumran. What sect? This was the problem. Well, the circumstances of the discovery, the latest documented of the scrolls, dates to about AD 72. AD 72 is a rather important date because it's the Jewish rebellion ended in that year. We know that at the time of the first Jewish rebellion, the second Jewish rebellion, 132-135, we're not concerned with, there were three basic religious sects, in addition to the Judeo-Christians and other organizations like that. The Sadducees were probably the most important. It was the smallest sect, but it included the priests in the temple and the aristocracy, the wealthiest people in Jerusalem. The Sadducees basically believed in a literal reading of the Torah, the name we give to the Old Testament of the Bible, and other Jewish holy writing. So that if the Torah said you should do this, you must do this. An eye for an eye as punishment for a crime, for example. Well, you can take this absolutely literally, or you can take it figuratively, the value of an eye for an eye. The Sadducees were kind of on the literal interpretation. The Pharisees, the most popular sect, most numerous sect, the common people in many ways, was populist. The Pharisees were in favour of interpreting the message of the Torah. So if the Bible says, if somebody harms you, you take an eye for an eye, you don't do this literally. Right? If somebody bangs you in the eye, you don't go around and bang them back in the eye, you get a fine, a penalty from them. So the Pharisees believed in interpreting the message of the Bible. Sadducees, rather strict interpretation. The Essenes, these were ascetics. They lived in the desert. They preferred to live a life that was dedicated to God and to the religion. They believed in a very strict literal reading of the Torah and the other holy writings, separation of men and women. Women during their periods, during the month, must be kept separately in another room altogether, another building. They didn't believe in marriage, all sorts of things like this. It was eventually agreed that basically these writings, Dead Sea Scrolls, probably represented this community, but there is no proof. There is nothing in the Dead Sea Scrolls that tells us who the writings belong to. Well, it just so happened that in addition to these three basic religious sects. You've got a minor one, a very small one, Jewish Christianity. Christianity starts off as a sect of the Jewish religion. But you've also got a group of rather nasty people in some ways known as zealots. Zealots were a kind of social, political, religious group. The area was ruled by Rome at this time. They were completely anti-Roman. They were completely against the way the Sadducees collaborated with the Romans. The Zealots started off basically what we call the First Jewish Rebellion in AD 66, which is finally crushed in AD 72 with the burning of the temple in Jerusalem in AD 70. After the First Jewish Rebellion, the Sadducees disappear from the scene, the Pharisees take over Judaism, the Essenes disappear from the scene. The importance in knowing this is that basically the Pharisees now become the dominant sect in Judaism, and they establish what we would recognize today as Orthodox Judaism. The thing is, though, the Dead Sea Scrolls presents us with a bit of a problem. However you interpret what sect the Dead Sea Scrolls belong to, they represent a form of Judaism that was legal, that was official at the time of the First Jewish Rebellion. But the writings of the Dead Sea Scroll indicate a different type of Judaism that exists today, based on the Pharisees. Which is the correct form of Judaism? See, the sort of question that comes up. And the sort of question really started to become a bit of a problem when this particular piece of the Dead Sea Scrolls was discovered. It's known as the Messiah fragment. Well, it's pretty straightforward in a sense. It refers to the coming of the end of the world, and it's about to happen anytime soon, well, 2,000 years ago. The Messiah will be sent from God. He will arrive on earth just before the end of the world. Those who follow the correct path of the Messiah will be the chosen ones who will go to heaven. Everybody else doesn't. The Messiah fragment, which belongs to the writings of a Jewish sect, is almost identical to part of the Christian New Testament. So we have this form of Judaism alive at this time, which parallels Christianity. Well, that's not so much a problem, except for the point of view, if these are the writings of a legitimate, official Jewish sect, then why shouldn't Jews today believe in these writings? It's only the Pharisees who say, no, you mustn't believe in these. Further examination revealed this. This almost certainly belongs to the same scroll as the previous one. It's known as the 4Q285, the Pierced Messiah fragment. This is a really difficult one to deal with, because this includes one of the most controversial lines in Jewish belief that we know of. 6 lines, that's all we have there. This fragment refers to the Messiah, the Prince of the Congregation. Now, Hebrew, like Arabic, doesn't use vowels, and you can understand what the vowels should be from the markings above the other letters. When you don't have those markings, then you can interpret the word as meaning something completely different. Depending on where you put the markings in the Hebrew in the Pierced Messiah scroll, you can come up with 2 different readings. One set of vowel marks says that the Messiah is yet to come, and that when he comes, he will pierce, he will kill the devil. But if you put the vowel markings in a slightly different place, you get a different reading. The Messiah has already come, and that he was pierced, killed by the devils, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, who did not recognize him as the Messiah. Well, this would be possibly a reference to Jesus Christ. All right? You can see how a problem starts developing from this. The accepted form of the holy books in Judaism today was decided upon by the Pharisees in AD 72. But who's to say that those were the correct form of the holy books? The people who decided this in AD 72. But what about these other ones? Well, actually, we don't know what sect these writings belong to. Some people think they might be the Essenes, because they were found in the middle of the desert, which is where the Essenes tended to live. Some people think that they might be a collection of writings of the Sadducees. You see, the writings of the Sadducees haven't survived because the Pharisees got rid of them all. So we don't know if there might be the Sadducees. It might actually represent the library of the Great Temple in Jerusalem. The only indication that this might be the case is the Copper Scroll. The Copper Scroll is something that's worthy of an Indiana Jones film. 5 steps from the corner of the door, in the ground you will find the golden treasure. If you go into the tunnel at the back of the building, the silver is kept there. This is basically what it says. It refers to an enormous treasure of gold and silver that's buried somewhere, but we don't know where. It doesn't say, in Jerusalem, on the corner of such and such street, you will find. The person who wrote this knew what they were talking about. But the only thing we can identify as a great treasure that might have needed to have been buried would be the great treasure of the Temple of Jerusalem. So this scroll would logically come from the Great Temple of Jerusalem, so therefore all the Dead Sea Scrolls logically come from the Great Temple of Jerusalem. So again, we're looking in the Dead Sea Scrolls at what was the correct form of Judaism at the time of the First Jewish Rebellion. This is really worthy of a major film, that one. Well, as I said, this sort of problem in correct form of religions, how do you reinterpret them, is not unique to the Dead Sea Scrolls. 1947, just before the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, 1945, some workmen at a place called Nag Hammadi in Egypt found a cave with at least 13 books in it. Books using leather paper, so we call it a codex, or codices, plural. Not scrolls, actual books. Well, they burnt one of these, to make a fire, and then Mum suddenly said, wait a minute, perhaps we ought to find out if these are valuable. Take them to the local priests, and they're actually written in Coptic, the language of the Christians in Egypt. Well, the antiquities dealers get to hear about this, they buy them, and in 1951, one was bought as a birthday present in New York for that famous psychiatrist Carl Jung. We know it as the Jung Codex. It was soon established that this particular codex represented the work of a Christian religious group known as the Gnostics. They get their name from the Greek word gnosis, meaning knowledge. They followed a belief system that mixed aspects of Judaism as we would know it with early Christianity. They claim in their writings to follow the original doctrine of Jesus Christ, especially in this very important thing in lots of Christianity, free choice. In other words, it's not decided what's going to happen to you the moment you're born. It's the way you live that determines whether you go to heaven or you don't go to heaven. Very important belief aspect. The core belief of Gnosticism was that humans are actually divine sacred beings, but they're trapped in a physical world. There's an imperfect God, the demiurge, who's always fighting with the perfect God. Only a life of perfection will allow you to get to heaven and meet the one supreme and true God. Now, the Gnostics were very influential in Asia Minor, where we are, and the Middle East in the 3rd and 4th century. But in the 5th century, they were declared heretical. In other words, they were against the proper religion. They disappear from view. The sale of the Young Codex, of course, made the Egyptian authorities aware that, whoa, something else must be lying around here. And by 1956, they managed to track down the original discoverers, and they found 11 books with fragments of 2 others representing 1,000 written pages. Here they are. These are now in the National Museum in Cairo. They started to be studied in great detail, and it became quite clear that this was the library of a Gnostic community. Now, we don't have a lot of information about the Gnostics because they were heretical, their writings were burnt. We don't know really why early Christians didn't like them very much. But in reading these, scholars started to find an alternative, legitimate form of Christianity. Well, just as with modern Judaism, modern Christianity depends on what we call a canon. A canon, a group of works that are accepted as being the true works within a religion or something like that. For Christianity, the canon was called the New Testament. Christians believe the New Testament are the words of God, or rather the words of prophets who have been divinely inspired by God. So it's not a direct message from God. The evidence is that the New Testament developed in the 1st century, the late 2nd century. The earliest canonical New Testament is much later. So this is what Christians believe in the New Testament. The canonical New Testament is no earlier than AD 180. The Nag Hammadi codices contain several non-canonical Christian holy writings. These include some very remarkable works. The Gospel of St. Thomas, one of the original followers of Christ. This is not accepted in modern Christianity. Why not? Because the church in Rome decided, and the church in Constantinople decided, this is not the real thing. A life of Jesus. Semi-biographical work, in which we can find readings in this that are represented in the New Testament, but other readings which are not. In early Christianity, sort of women were given very much an inferior role. In most religions they are. In the life of Jesus, women are given a much more important role in the religion. But this is something that's been suppressed and put down like that. So you see, with the Nag Hammadi Gospels, you again come up with this problem. With any religion, somebody has decided what the religion is going to be, but who knows what the correct form of the religion is, because somebody else decided it, and you don't have these other ones. This problem goes into Islam as well. There's a great debate amongst Islamic scholars about what to do with a series of copies of the Quran that were found in Sana'a in Yemen. In Sana'a, a very old mosque, Maktabat al-Jami al-Kubir, because it's built with its own version of the Kaaba there. And working on this particular mosque in 1972, some workmen found a room sealed off that was full of old Qurans. As with Bibles never get thrown away, Qurans never get thrown away, they're sacred writings. These Qurans have been stored up for years after years after years. Well, nobody really took much notice of them when they were originally 5, but then a bit later, the 65 of the original finds, 72, the room was opened up again, and some parts disappeared to be sold on the antiquities market. This is a single page, not much bigger than that. Sold on the antiquities market in 1992, £159,000, resold only 5 years ago for £2,200,000. Well, when news of this got out, of course, everybody in Sana'a, imams and everybody said, we've got to protect this material. I mean, this is ridiculous. This is very, very important material. So in 1976, they appointed a group of German, Arabic, Islamic scholars to study them. And they got together 40,000 separate pages from different Qurans and sorted them out into the original versions wherever possible. One of the things they discovered quite early on was that many of these Qurans were palimpsest. With leather, when you write on leather, well, the proper word is parchment rather than leather. Parchment. You know where parchment was developed? Leather for writing on? Pergamon. Pergamano. Pergamano parchmenta. Pergamon. When you write on parchment, if you make a mistake, you can scrape it off and put the correct letter in. Parchment is very expensive, and what they discovered with the Qurans in Sana'a was that many of them had had the original writing scraped off so that it could be reused. And by using infrared light, you can see the traces of the original letters there. Well, this was a very exciting find, because once they started looking at these in more detail, under infrared light, they could see that some of these were written in the Hijazi script. The Hijazi script was the type of Arabic writing used at the time of the Prophet. It went out of fashion around about 680 or so. So it could be dated in that particular way. They then did a radiocarbon dating assessment of this particular piece of parchment. It could be precisely dated to between 645 and 690, so immediately after the time of the Prophet. The importance of this is that the Sana'a Quran, the oldest one, is older than the time of Caliph Uthman. Caliph Uthman's time, they were using the Kufic script. Well, what about Caliph Uthman? The evidence is, in what used to be the oldest surviving Quran, till it was burnt in a fire in Damascus in the 19th century, was that between 653 and 654, Caliph Uthman, ruling in Damascus, ordered a group of scholars to study every version of the Quran that then existed and to prepare a canonical Quran. In the Quran that survived in Damascus, it says at the beginning, once this Quran had been prepared using the older one, all the older ones were burnt. They were destroyed. The one at Sana'a escaped, surviving. Now, scholars have always known that there is a problem with Caliph Uthman's Quran. Apart from the beautiful number of surah and the number of lines in each one, it's just too mathematical. The problem is the hadith refer to some surah that don't exist in Caliph Uthman's Quran. So these were surahs that were popular, known of, at the time of the Prophet and immediately afterwards, but Caliph Uthman's scholars said, no, we don't accept these. Well, you might go along with that to a certain extent. One Christian writer talks about the surah of the camel. He describes it. It doesn't exist in the Quran today. And you've probably heard about the satanic verses as well. Salman Rushdie nearly got killed for writing a novel based on the satanic verses. The satanic verses refer to a time when the Prophet was trying to convert people in Mecca to what becomes Islam. And he's given a message from the archangel, according to the satanic verses, that he must mention 3 female goddesses as being equal. These are taken out. These are devil-inspired. You won't find these in the Quran today. So we know that Caliph Uthman's Quran is an edited Quran. It's what the scholars pulled together and decided had to be a particular version. What's acceptable? Now, it's written in a Kufic script, like Hebrew. It doesn't have vowel markings, which means that the Quran claims for itself it is mubin, it's clear. If you talk to a very serious Islamic scholar, you will find, well, actually no, some passages are not clear. The Saudi Arabian government, which holds the copyright on all Qurans, refuses to allow official translations of the Quran. They say it's because this is the language it should be read in, but the reality is you can interpret the Quran in different ways, in different languages. It's not mubin. There are problems with the Quran. Not the only problem. 694-714, Haji bin Yusuf, governor of Iraq, issued a revised version of Caliph Uthman's Quran. When he read it, he didn't know where the vowel marking should go. I think this should be an A, perhaps that should be an I, that should be a and so forth. This Quran, as revised by him, he claims to have inserted over 1,000 letter alif, letter A in it, becomes the new canonical version of the Quran. So first of all, you've got Uthman and his scholars decide on what is the real Quran and what's not. And they cut some things out, we know that. They destroy all older Quran. Then we've got Haji bin Yusuf coming along going, oh, I don't quite understand this. I think it must mean that. So he issues a canon. So what is the canonical Quran? Well, the purpose of this class really is just to make you aware of the problems in accepting what you're told as being the literal truth. Always inquire. I hope I haven't upset anybody with specific religious beliefs, but it's always worthwhile to question what you were told and even what you were read sometimes. Okay then, we'll stop there